Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be taking a look at real estate in the era of COVID-19. What does it mean for us? Is it a good time to buy? Is it a bad time to sell? What happens if we can't afford to pay our rent because we're out of a job? Is there a recourse available? On the show today, we're going to be talking to a seasoned professional in the real estate business, and he's going to tell us more about that as we talk about the topic of real estate in the age of COVID-19. I'm Michael Robinson, host of the Michael S. Robinson Show here on Microbin Radio. Welcome to our live streaming of US or Us Beyond COVID-19. We're live every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're on Facebook. Look for Michael Robinson NY, and we're on YouTube. That's Michael S. Robinson. Please subscribe and click the like button if you like what we're talking about, and we certainly invite you to join the conversation with comments and questions. So no one really understands real estate in Fort Lauderdale, which is where I am, if most of you don't know, more than my next guest. He has been considered one of the top-ranking realtors worldwide. New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Miami Herald, and CNN rely on his market expert when it comes to trend analysis. His name is Andy Weiser, and he's no stranger to the Michael S. Robinson Show. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you, Michael. How are you?
I am well. How are you thriving and surviving?
I'm actually doing really, really well. The market is still here. People think that, oh my God, everything is shut down. Well,
Right.
It really hasn't.
Right.
Because people are always buying, people are always selling. There's always a reason for some people to have to. So it's a trying time.
Let's talk about that, because we know that the economy is devastated, right? Because of the fact that the plug has been pulled and a lot of folks don't have the money to buy property of any sort. So who is actually buying, if you can give us an idea as to what that might be?
This is the same group of people that would have bought before. So it really hasn't changed a whole heck of a lot in that respect, because there's really no nice way of saying this, but for most people, if they are falling behind on their rent because they didn't have 2 weeks rent or paycheck or 2 paychecks saved up,
Right.
they're really not people who are buying property. So that makes a huge difference in what we're talking about, when we start looking at this whole pandemic and everything else that's going on, where the difference is that you have a lot of white collar people who have been laid off or who are working from home, which for a lot of them is the same as being laid off because they're just not used to it. So we've changed a lot in how we're looking at things. The rental market is totally, totally different from the sales market. I can speak about either one, and the rental market I can speak to.
We'll talk about the rental market later, but I wanted to get into sort of like the buying and selling process, because in my mind, everything is sort of like at a standstill. So it really surprises me that people are actually still buying, and people are selling, and are we talking about a depreciation? Because certainly with everything that's happening, everyone thinks that this is the time to either buy stocks, right? Or buy things that we normally would put on the back burner because it's super expensive. So is this a buyer's market or a seller's market? How is it?
Right now, there's about a 6.4 month supply of real estate out there in the Florida area. And that's what I'm going to talk about primarily. I'll do a little bit of national, But in Florida, there's about a 6.4 month. So we're pretty equal. I would tend to say we're still more of a seller's market because there is not a huge amount coming on the market at this point. So that will, the general definition of a seller's market is when there's less property available.
Sure. Yeah. So what about the banks? Are the banks lending money, or is this a problem?
I knew that's where you were going to go.
Yeah,
I knew you were going.
that's the bottom line, because if somebody is thinking of buying, then, they're most likely not going to have $500,000 sitting in their accounts. They're going to run to the bank to borrow. So how is that?
Well, the banks have tightened up a whole heck of a lot. But there are certain banks that are still offering some really great products. I mean, rates are incredibly low right now. There was something that came out today from the National Mortgage Bankers Association, and their numbers, they sort of threw their numbers around, and they're sort of nice, so I'm going to glance at them. Mortgage applications increased last week by 12%.
Wow.
And they said that's the strongest level in almost a month.
Wow. Okay.
Which is really sort of interesting because that's in almost a month. But what it goes on to say later on is that these rates are still down 20% from last year at this time. So that's really sort of telling you that there are less people buying new property. What they're seeing is, what a lot of mortgage broker friends of mine are seeing is a lot of refinances, which is a completely different animal because rates are so unbelievably low right now that what a lot of people are doing is just taking advantage of cheaper money. So we're not only seeing people who currently have mortgages refinancing, we're seeing some people who might have bought their house for all cash or paid it off. With rates being this low, they're saying, what the heck, it doesn't make sense not to have a mortgage because they can do more with the money. Going back to what you were saying about buying stock versus real estate, it really depends on the level of pain your stomach can take. Because some people don't like the roller coaster of the stock market right now. And there are a lot of people, and I have a whole group of investors who do this. They buy real estate because it's bricks and mortar. They buy stuff, they rent it out. And we're not talking big, sexy apartments. We're talking really very basic stuff. The stuff that you don't see on a TV show. This is the stuff where real people live. And this is where, that stuff, the people will always pay their rent. They find a way of making rent. So it's always a good investment. Not only now, I'm talking at all times, because the economy will come back at some point.
Yes, of course.
That's been pretty traditional.
But considering that it's a 20% drop compared to last year at this time, that isn't bad, right?
It's not as bad as everybody thinks it is. You have to read a lot of what's out there and listen to what's out there. If you were buying a house in March, chances are you had that down payment in March. So that down payment is still probably pretty safe unless you were taking it out of the stock market kind of thing, in which case it may have dropped, it may not have dropped.
Right.
I look at my sister who's a realtor up in Palm Beach County, and she just had somebody walk away from a large deal because to come up with the down payment, they were going to lose $250,000 in cash just to sell the stock, because that's just where the stock was. They walked away from a $130,000 down payment because it was less painful to walk away from $130,000 than the higher number. So a lot of this depends on where your money's coming from. If you've sold a house and you're sitting with money in the bank, or you're not even sitting with the money in the bank, you've sold the house, you need someplace new to go. That's a perfect reason to buy.
Right, I see. Now, so we're looking at things in the short-term venue, like 6 months from now. Do you see much change happening?
I see the market coming back a little bit stronger. I think there are people who are sitting on the sidelines right now saying, gee, I don't want to go out. There are a whole group of people, and I can't blame them, that don't want to interact with as many people as possible. So those people aren't going out on showings. But that takes us back to something else, which is virtual showings. And, you and I have gone through this before, where a good realtor will listen to their client, will send them the listings. The listings have pictures, the listings have virtual tours. So that's not a heck of a lot different. You might be up in New York, for example. We go through 20, 30 properties. We narrow it down to 5. At some point you come down, you look at the properties. Right. That's what's happening now, is that people are choosing their top 5 properties, and they're doing one of 2 things. They're either saying, okay, we will come down at some point. Let's keep a file on these properties. Let's look for other properties that are similar to them, and that's what we're going to look at. Or what the other thing they're doing is they're writing contracts, but there's an out in the contract. And what the out is that they have to physically see the property. Now, this can cause a lot of problems, because if you're really buying a home to live in, I don't know of a lot of people that are going to buy a house sight unseen. Mm-hmm. It does happen. I'm not going to say it doesn't happen. Army people say they do it all the time. Or people who are in State Department say they do it all the time. But for the average human being, they want to touch what they're going to be moving into. Mm-hmm. So this out clause can create a lot of problems, because the granite, or the quartz that looked so great in the video tour, mm-hmm. may not be quite as nice. Right. The floors may not really be as wonderful as it looked in the video tour. Mm-hmm. So that buyer can walk once they've seen the house. So right. in that respect, we're really not operating a whole heck of a lot differently than we did before.
So what volume of people do you see that are looking to buy that live here versus people from out of state, let's say New York or up north? What is the volume in terms of percentage?
Down here right now, it's pretty much the locals.
Oh.
We have a problem with people coming in from up north, which is there's still a huge amount of money up north that can do whatever the heck they want to do with their money. Mm-hmm. Those people weren't affected by anything, but we've been affected for a few years by what's called SALT, which is the amount of deduction you can take on your mortgage and your taxes. So if you're in a high tax state, it becomes a problem. So a property you may have bought a few years ago is actually worth less than it might have been previously, because the deductions are gone. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing more locals buying down here in Florida, but we are getting a huge amount of interest. I mean, unbelievable amounts of interest at all hours of the day and night, because people have nothing to do except look at real estate. So people are questioning. We're getting a lot more questions than we ever got before. People who may not have thought about this for a few years are now all of a sudden, wow, gee, it might be really cool to move to Florida. They're tired of being cooped up in a New York apartment. I can tell you, I've spoken to a lot of friends who have basically said, gee, you're really lucky. You want to jump in the pool when you're really tired of working in the house. You can do it. We can't. We're in our apartments. We're in, an 800 square foot, right. 1 bedroom, 1.5 bath
trapped
kind of thing.
With somebody that you may not like.
Yeah, that's a whole other issue. Yeah. That's a huge issue.
Right. That's a huge issue. You're absolutely right. I think the other misconception, and that's what we were going at the beginning, is that a lot of people think that because the economy is at this slower pace, that prices have gone down. So it is a good time to buy a house. It's a good time to do that big ticket item purchase that you would not have done 6 months ago. So it's really interesting that you're talking about people calling and inquiring, because I think that is the motive a lot of times. People are thinking that the price points are somewhat cheaper.
And that's a misconception.
Yes.
Because the price points really haven't come down. What's happened is there are less people looking, which is why there are less sales right now. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But less people, actually, I shouldn't say that. There are less people buying right now, right. More people looking. But we have less property coming on the market at the same time. So that's what's happening. We really haven't seen this incredible drop in prices like people thought there was going to be.
Right.
And the other thing is people are saying, well, what about foreclosures and short sales? Well, those take a long time to come to market as well. So we haven't seen those yet either. And that's mixed. Some people are saying, yes, there's going to be a huge number. Other people are saying, no, there's not.
Yeah.
So I'm
That was going to
still
be
sort of,
one of my questions about potential foreclosures in the next year or so, because there's so much unknown, right? We're in a territory that we don't know much about. Let's talk about rentals and people who are renting apartments. The South Florida market has been decimated, right? Based on jobs that are lost, based on people not having money to pay their rents, and not just here, all over the country. New York City, my friends complain all the time. They're either bored at home or wondering where the next check is coming from. So
right.
tell us about what recourse is available for someone who doesn't have the money to pay for rent, but the rent is due. They don't have a job. They've been great tenants for 5, 10, 20 years. What is available for them at a time when, out of no reason that they might have left the job market, are without a job?
Well, that's the whole thing right there. You've talked about good tenants, and then there are also bad tenants. So let's just deal with the good tenants right now. The best thing that a good tenant can do is reach out to their landlord. Don't leave the landlord just hanging there. If you talk to your landlord and say, look, I don't have my job. Can we work something out? Can we either have forbearance or, and people, actually, let's talk about the difference between forbearance and deferral. Two totally different items, and people don't understand the difference. And this goes for mortgages as well as rent. But let's talk about it with rent right now. If your landlord says to you, gee, I'll give you forbearance for 3 months. Sounds like a wonderful thing. It means I don't have to pay anything for 3 months. That's what most people think. Well, at that 4th month, you have to make up those 3 months that you didn't pay.
Yes.
Which is really, really a difficult thing for most people. Because if you didn't have the money during those 3 months, chances are you're not going to have it in the 4th month.
Right.
So that's why that's difficult.
So
the other option is working out is a workout. You do a workout with your landlord.
Right.
Where you might be paying less right now, and you're going to catch up when you get a job or when you get your job back, or whatever ends up happening with you financially. But the worst thing that a tenant can do is just run and hide, because that usually ticks off landlords to no end.
I think this is a problem that is pervasive across the country, because there's so many people without work and so many people that really live paycheck to paycheck. And if they're collecting unemployment insurance, which usually is not the full amount of their salary, they're just not able to pay the full amount of rent. And it also goes for commercial buildings too. I mean, I think about how many restaurants are out of business because they can't afford to pay the rent. And even if they were to partially open, I mean, how could you afford to pay your expenses on a partially open business model? It doesn't work unless you have some sort of an agreement with your landlord where you can come down in the rent price, probably for 3 or 4 or 5 months, and then it gives you a cushion so that you can kind of make some money and run your business. Because the whole economic crisis right now, it's just set up in a way that it does not really support small businesses in particular, and people who live from paycheck to paycheck. And that's the great fear that I have and I see moving forward. Not now, but 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months from now, And that's one of the reasons why we see so many small businesses closing, is because, they do not have, as you mentioned, the ability to go and talk to a landlord and say, hey, let's work something out. Or maybe they have, and the landlord is just not savvy enough to say, oh, I understand, let's make a deal. Because if that person moves out of that rental space, chances of filling that space in the next year is for the landlord. So I think it's really to everyone's best interest to come to the table and have some sort of a dialogue and make some sort of a agreement, compromise on how you can make this payment moving forward. So that's one of the reasons why I think it's important for us to talk about this openly. Certainly a conversation with landlords are important, because one of the reasons I was asking you the question is, does the government or the law have some sort of a blanket to help out people who are in this situation?
We all wish to God they did. But there is nothing right now, and it's going to vary state to state. So Florida's laws are going to be totally different than New York's laws.
Right.
And you're entirely right that partially opening, let's just use a restaurant, for example. Partially opening a restaurant is going to be almost impossible because when you start looking at the protections that people have to put in place right now, as well as the amount of tables that can get turned, and that's how restaurants make money,
Absolutely.
is by turning tables, or they make money at their bar. Well, the bars are closed. You can't really wait at the bar until your table is ready. The few restaurants that have talked about doing it in other states, they're saying, okay, we're going to have to put 6 feet between people. So if you have a 30-foot bar, that's 5 drinks you can serve. Then you have the whole issue of how many people you're going to allow at a table because of social distancing. You're probably looking at 4 tops, so 4 people max, and that's going to be at a large table. The other thing is you can't usually buy things in small bulk. You have to buy regular size bulk. So the restaurants are going to have to change their entire menus, everything else. So it's not going to work really well for most restaurants. The takeout thing has been a boon. I will say that. It's saved a lot of restaurants. And there are some that I've questioned, why didn't they do it? That's their business model. I think you're right. We're going to see a lot of places that never reopen, unfortunately. A lot of restaurants are just going to throw in the towel. And if their landlord is not willing to work with them, and this is not only restaurants, this is stores as well, when stores can reopen. If they're not willing to work with them, the landlord ends up being stuck on the hook for more money. Expenses that a tenant might normally pay. So now the landlord's on the hook for that. So it really behooves a good landlord to try and work with their tenant. If they've been a miserable tenant to start with, that's a different story.
Right, exactly.
Because that tenant was probably on their way out to start with, but we're going on the assumption that we're dealing with decent people.
Right. It's funny, I was watching CNN the other day and they were showing you these restaurants that were opening in Georgia, I think, and there were shower curtains between the table. And I'm thinking to myself, well, first of all, why would I want to go out and eat at a table with a shower curtain around me? And second of all, the virus isn't going to be stopping in front of the curtain and saying, oh, there's a curtain here, I can't go around it. It just doesn't make sense, right? So
you have to tell the virus that.
you have to have a conversation.
Tell the virus and then it stays.
Okay. So the thing is that it's all going back to this really strange time of figuring out how we make small businesses functional, moving forward. Because if you're outside and you're sitting 6 feet apart, I mean, that makes perfect sense. But indoors in a small enclosed area, I mean, I really don't see someone like myself or you, Andy, feeling comfortable going to a restaurant, wondering if you're going to pick up the virus from some unknown source. So there's that emotional and psychological factor as well that we're playing with, whether people, even if the restaurants open up tomorrow, even if all the businesses open up tomorrow, the mindset of people going out and buying and spending and being a part of the economy is going to be somewhat kind of slim. A lot of folks are going to be
tiny,
thinking twice.
Michael, it's not going to be slim. It's going to be tiny.
Yeah. I mean,
because most people I speak to don't want to go out yet.
No.
And
Absolutely.
These are not people who are normally fearful. These are pretty average people. They're just not comfortable going out yet. You brought up the shower curtain. So after you're done eating, they have to now go and wipe down that shower curtain.
I don't think they're doing that. I mean,
I doubt they're going to do that also.
Right.
I also doubt that.
Right, exactly.
So, I mean, in that respect, it's sort of a farce, because if they have the shower curtain there and the table behind you gets up, are they going to get up and wipe the shower curtain down so it's, bashing against your head kind of thing? Right. I don't think so.
Yeah.
And this is why I don't really see that being a great model. So I think the model that they're coming up with which is anything from 25 to 50% occupancy, it sounds great in theory. It's going to go back to who's going out.
Who's going out? And also, does that mean the food is going to cost more? Because that restaurateur or business is going to have to increase their price points in order to even cover the basic cost of opening to begin with.
So you increase your price point and you don't get the customers.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I don't see that being a very good model. You might be able to add $1 or $2 to an item, but I think the successful restaurants that we're seeing out there right now, the ones doing really a bang up takeout, have trimmed their menus and come up with a way of doing a lesser priced menu rather than an increased priced menu.
Makes sense. So let's talk about best practice, and then we'll wrap things up for a potential buyer, a potential seller, and then a tenant. Best practice.
Best practice for a seller, if I call you as a realtor and say, gee, Michael, I want to show your house this afternoon or tomorrow. Is that okay? You say yes. Obviously, people are going to be wearing masks. They're going to be wearing gloves. Some people insist on booties. We can do that as well. That's not a problem. I would say, Michael, do me a favor, make sure every light is on, open every closet, open every door that goes to the garage, that goes to every bathroom, open the cabinet door so we can see what there is. Open the patio door. Yes, I know your air conditioning is on and you're wasting AC. I'm sorry about that, but we're trying to not have buyers touch as much as possible. As far as for a buyer, be respectful. Whereas before people would, move things around on a table kind of thing, don't do it. It's not your house yet. At least at this point, especially on a first showing, you're looking at something. It's a little more difficult for realtors because for somebody like me who has a construction background, I'm used to being able to say, okay, you don't like the arrangement of the kitchen? Well, we can move this here, that there, and there's other things someplace else. I now have to yell it from 6 feet away because we're still social distancing. The entire showing it's a very strange kind of a situation because you are social distancing. So what has always been a very intimate kind of a relationship between a realtor and a buyer or a realtor and a seller is now a little different. As far as signing a listing agreement, we can do all of that virtually. I mean, we sign most contracts virtually at this point. We can do listing presentations the way we're all talking right now. We can do listing presentations virtually. We can show a property to a buyer virtually. The same thing with if you're a tenant looking to rent a new apartment. It can be done either virtually. I mean, I just put a lease out today. Somebody has never seen the apartment. He's moving here from Georgia. He looked at the tour, and his thing was, it's a year. Worst thing that happens is I really hate it, and I don't renew after a year. Very adult way of looking at it.
Absolutely.
It's also a vacant apartment, so it makes life a lot easier.
For sure, yes.
But if you are a tenant who is looking to move, understand that it's not as easy now as it once was, just because there are more strictures in place.
Well, thank you very much, Andy. You have been a gem of information.
Always.
Andy Weiser, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us.
My pleasure. If anybody wants to get a hold of me, Michael can tell you how to find me, or I can tell you right now.
By all means, go ahead and tell everyone how they can get a hold of you.
Easiest way to find me. Easiest way to find me, either andyweiser.com or email me at andyweiser@AOL. Yes, I know it's old. I've had it for 33 years. You can email me there or just call me, 954-560-9667. Thanks so much. Michael, always great speaking with you.
Thank you, Andy. It's a pleasure having you on. And thank you all for joining us. I'm Michael Robinson. Remember, this is your time. Use it wisely.